Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
We recently talked on the program about the federal leasing regulations, but how often are those violated and what can you do if they are? I'll get some answers about that and more from Tom Crowley and Kristopher Synder of OOIDA's Business Services Department. There are a lot of ways to get crossways with the IRS. One is simply not filing your taxes, and failing to file your taxes can potentially be a disaster, but it doesn't have to be. I'll discuss some of the issues involved with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, a new first-in-the-nation truck weight enforcement rule in New York has drawn the ire of OOIDA. Scott Thompson discusses that, plus an effort to remove tolls from the Mackinac Bridge in Michigan with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. Diesel prices are up again nationwide, but the increase isn't as pronounced as it has been in recent weeks. The Energy Information Administration's weekly report has last week's average up 1 cent from the previous week to $4.38 a gallon. That makes 4 straight weeks of increases, during which the price of diesel has spiked more than 57 cents. 8 of the 10 regions EIA tracks saw prices go up, the only exceptions being the Midwest and Gulf Coast regions. ProMiles.com also reported an increase in prices. It had the Tuesday morning average at $4.30 a gallon nationwide, up 6 cents from a week earlier. All 10 regions in the ProMiles report have had prices increase by at least 4 cents over the past 7 days. As the fall shipping season gets closer, DAT is seeing freight volume tick down and maintain toward the lower end of historical trends. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
Robert Rouse with DAT says national benchmark broker to carrier spot rates for dry vans and flatbeds decreased last week, while reefers stayed flat.
When we look at vans, they were about $2.10 a mile, or about $1.58 without fuel. And, that's just 2 cents per mile above the 2019 levels. But again, that's really when you look at fuel and all of that, there's a lot more operating expenses. So it's still making it pretty tough for vans. For reefers, they were at $2.52 per mile. And reefer line haul rates remain flat, around $1.95 per mile without fuel. But that's 35 cents per mile lower than 2022. But it is about 7 cents per mile higher than in 2019. And lastly, with flatbeds, they were at $2.55 per mile. When we take out fuel at $1.92 per mile, the national average flatbed spot rate is about 38 cents lower than last year, but it is about 7 cents higher than 2019. Since this year's high at $2.16 per mile recorded in the first week of June, flatbed spot rates have been on a steady downhill run, dropping about 24 cents per mile since then.
Rouse says DAT typically sees the market pick up a little steam the first week of September. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. New seatbelt regulations are in the works for passenger vehicles, and a similar rule for heavy trucks is possible. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration will soon publish a notice of proposed rulemaking designed to encourage seatbelt use. Manufacturers are the target here. Under the new rules, they would be required to equip vehicles with additional seatbelt warning systems for both the right front passenger seat and rear seats. In other words, the alert that currently occurs if the driver isn't buckled up when the vehicle starts moving would apply to everyone in the vehicle, and it wouldn't go off until everyone buckles up. NHTSA estimates that the proposed requirements would prevent about 300 injuries and more than 100 deaths each year. As for commercial trucks, NHTSA took previous comments on that issue to heart. One commenter in particular argued that requiring additional seatbelt warning systems for commercial vehicles could pose significant challenges, so any requirements for larger vehicles should be considered in a separate rulemaking. Minnesota and Wisconsin are seeking federal help in their joint bid to rebuild an aging bridge between Duluth and Superior. The governors of both states said Monday that their respective departments of transportation are asking for more than $1 billion in federal funding to rebuild the John A. Blatnick Bridge. The money would come from the bipartisan infrastructure law. The cost of the entire project from start to finish is projected to be as high as $1.8 billion when accounting for inflation. Design work on the project is set to begin next year. After that begins, officials will have a better idea of the total cost. Construction is set to start in 2027 if and when full funding is secured. The Mackinac Bridge first opened to traffic in 1961 and is said to be reaching the end of its service life. It carries nearly 265,000 trucks each year. An investigation is underway in Nashville after a man was run over and killed by a tractor-trailer over the weekend. The Metro Nashville Police Department says a truck driver had parked in an alley behind a fueling station and after putting the truck in drive to leave early Saturday morning, felt a bump. The driver got out to see what happened and found the victim. Police believe that victim had been sleeping under the truck. No other details have been released so far. Police say they're looking to identify the victim and will provide more information as it comes. A North Carolina woman is set to stand trial over accusations she embezzled more than $900,000 from the trucking company she used to work for. A federal grand jury indicted Michelle Wilshire this week. Her former company was not named in the Department of Justice news release, but public records show she used to work for TruePack, a family-owned business based out of Conover. Prosecutors say Wilshire, while in charge of finances for TruePack, stole close to $1 million over a nearly 4-year period through various schemes using prepaid debit cards, fraudulent checks, and other methods. She's charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, tax fraud, and money laundering and faces decades in prison. A Canadian trucking company has been ordered to pay up for a fuel spill. It happened 4 years ago in Ontario when a truck owned by Jagger Canada was involved in a crash that spilled fuel about 50 feet from a stream near Nays Provincial Park. Ontario officials say Jagger failed to clean up the spill in a timely manner as required by law. The company was recently convicted by the provincial court of 3 charges under the Environmental Protection Act and fined 30,000 Canadian dollars plus a $7,500 victim fine surcharge. The Women in Trucking Foundation has announced its spring 2023 scholarship recipients. A total of 31 scholarships were awarded out of more than 100 applications. The Women in Trucking Foundation Scholarship Program is intended to help women overcome financial barriers so they can access education and training programs as they pursue careers in trucking. Applications for the fall 2023 scholarship are now being accepted. The deadline is September 30th. And finally, Love's is launching its annual fundraiser for Children's Miracle Network hospitals this week. Every dollar raised goes to local member hospitals benefiting children and their caregivers. Love's customers can donate a number of ways, including straight donations, rounding up their purchase, or buying a $1, $5, or $20 balloon. The fundraiser runs from Friday through September 29th. Since 1999, Love's has raised $46 million for Children's Miracle Network hospitals. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Or maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air? Or do you have a question about something happening in the trucking industry? Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Again, that email address is landlinenow@ooida.com. If you'd like to join OOIDA, you can do it at a discount. Just call the membership department during business hours at 816-229-5791. You can join the association or renew your membership for 2 years for $50, a $40 discount. Next, I'll discuss the federal leasing regulations with Tom Crowley and Kristopher Snyder of OOIDA. We'll find out what to do if you haven't filed your taxes from Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And Scott Thompson discusses weight enforcement in New York with state expert Keith Goebel. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
For Katniss accuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
When you weigh on a cat scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. We recently talked on the program about the federal leasing regulations, but how often are those violated and what can you do if they are? Here to offer some answers about that and some other topics are Tom Crowley and Kristopher Synder of OOIDA's Business Services Department. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Good to be here, Mark.
Let's kind of start with the basic question. How often are we seeing contracts that violate the leasing regulations these days? I mean, at one point it was kind of rampant, but is it still at that stage, or what are we looking at?
Yeah, Mark, the problem with the leasing regulations is the enforcement over them is civil right of action only. The feds don't get into enforcing them. Well, let me back that up. The feds don't get into enforcing a whole lot. If they did on a bigger scale, I think it would be a different industry. But it is what it is. The leasing regulations, as we know under 376.12 in the FMCSR, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation book, they are a set of leasing regulations that cover an owner-operator who would lease himself and his equipment, him or herself, and their equipment to a carrier and operate under the carrier's authority. Those leasing regulations are supposed to dictate everything from, any contractual obligation, but everything from how much you get paid, how often you get paid, what your obligations are to the carrier and to the carrier's customer, and what the carrier's obligations are to you. As far as how compliant they are, that's another story. I mean, carriers tend to write leases between themselves and their carriers that don't always follow the leasing regulations, or if they do, the carrier themselves doesn't always follow them. And I tell folks, everything you do for a carrier when you're leased on to them is a contractual obligation. Everything they do for you is a contractual obligation. Anything outside of that contract, if it's something they want outside of that contract, there's no obligation. Yet carriers, they really push it to the edge. They take advantage if you allow them. I mean, it's just it's a situation that you as a owner operator leased onto a motor carrier, you've got to watch out for. You got to watch out for yourself.
Well, and that's a good point. Is if you let them, how many carriers or how many guys out there aren't reading their contract? How many of them don't know that they're being taken advantage of?
That's a good point.
Our membership only covers so many drivers. How many of them out there have just not even realized, but they're being taken advantage of?
Or possibly not read their contract, which is a big mistake.
It is. And myself, when I would lease on with carriers in the past, I can't say that I read contract word for word. I did look through it, but, it is very important to read it word for word and to know what it says, because there's parts in the contract that talks about the rates and seeing what the carrier gets on the rates. And if you're not exercising those rights, well, any right that you don't exercise tends to get forgot about. And then pretty soon standard operation procedures is that, well, you don't ask about that. So you need to exercise your rights that come with the federal leasing regulations.
Let's take this from a different angle here. What are the violations that we're seeing most frequently?
Some of the most frequent ones have to do with escrow. That carriers take out a certain amount of escrow. They'll hold it back and they'll say, hey, this is for if there's any issues after you depart, or, if there's any claims or anything like that. But then carriers, when they separate with the owner-operator, they have 45 days in which to return that escrow. And during that time, they do a couple of different things. Sometimes they come up with off-the-roll reasons why the carrier won't get that escrow back. Or some carriers just look at it as a parting gift that they decide they want to keep. And what options does the carrier really have other than to lawyer up and take them to court, which is not always the easiest thing to do. So I would say escrow is one of the biggest. The other one would be the rate sheets. As a owner-operator leased on with a carrier, you have a right to know that if you're getting paid percentage, 70% of the gross, you got a right to know what that gross is, to know that you're being paid correctly. And that's another one that carriers just absolutely don't want to turn loose of that information. You have a right to it, but carriers don't want to turn loose of it. So what do? Again, you could end up in court.
So if you've got a contract and you've been presented, you're looking at leasing on with a carrier, and you look at this thing and you see some things in there that are suspect, what do you do at that point?
Well, I mean, if a discussion with the carrier doesn't relieve the issues, you can always call, you can call the compliance department. We can look at it. We can tell you what should and shouldn't be in there. But ultimately, it's your decision. Do you lease on with that carrier, or do you find somebody that tends to do things right? That's up to you. Do you lease on? Because I've talked to people that are leased to carriers where they know there's violations going on. They know they're not being dealt with fairly, yet they don't leave. They don't want to go do something else. Well, I mean, hey, that's up to you. If you choose to stay in that situation, then that's you. But I, for one, I would rather go someplace else. I don't want to be where I know I'm getting ripped off. If you're ripping me off, I don't want to be there.
There you go. Are there positives to look for in a lease?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the positives that you would look for in a lease is, number one, do they follow the leasing regulations? And does the carrier actually follow those leases? Because you do get leases that are compliant, that look good, that say basically, oh, look, I can make a boatload of money, but then carriers that don't follow them. It's important not only to have a compliant lease, but to be working for a carrier that understands that lease means something and that it should be followed. That gives the owner-operator and the carrier both an expectation, of what to expect and no surprises. When you're talking about your money, the last thing you want is surprises because they're usually not good.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a different topic, and one that unfortunately also involves some unpleasant surprises. Amazon double brokered loads, which have been running kind of rampant lately, and we've talked about it on the program before. But we had a case recently, and I'm wondering, Tom, if you can tell us about this particular case.
Yeah. Well, let me first say, if you're pulling Amazon loads for Amazon, that's one thing. But anytime you're pulling an Amazon load for an outside carrier, you can figure it's double brokered. I was talking to a guy called up here, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and he had hauled several Amazon loads. And he went on the second one, the first one he hauled, no problems, no questions. He just hauled it, delivered it, got his paperwork, and went on back. On the second one, when he went to deliver it to an Amazon distribution center, the guard at the guard shack told him, hey, you're at the wrong facility. And he's like, no, this is where my Raycon shows. And the guard double checked and said, no, you're at the wrong facility. He says, but we'll go ahead and take this trailer in and we'll get it where it's supposed to be. So the guy, he was a little confused about it, got his paperwork signed, then submitted it all to be paid, and the broker disappeared. Couldn't get a hold of him. Some more of this fake broker fraud business going on out there. So here he hauled 2 Amazon loads. Even if one of them wasn't where it's supposed to be at, Amazon still took it in because they knew immediately what was up and that they would have one of their inside carriers get it where it's supposed to be, so it saved them. But Amazon doesn't step up and stop this. There's nobody to call at Amazon. When you haul one of their loads and you find out it's fraudulent, there's nobody to call at Amazon. You can't get a hold of anybody. It's a real difficult situation to deal with. And to my knowledge, this particular carrier, has never been paid for either of these loads, nor do I think he will be.
Is there anything he could have done at that point to try and resolve this situation in a positive way?
At that point, probably not. Once he had already hauled the loads, he's already put out the fuel, the wear and tear on his vehicles, the time, and now he's not going to get paid. Probably not. I mean, he can go back to the double broker. If that double broker was set up to resemble a legitimate broker, there may be a bond in place. Of course, we know how these bonds get $1 million worth of freight rates going against $75,000 bond, which is pennies on the dollar. He may have been able to go rep back that way, but I don't think that the broker that he hauled for was even legitimate, because as I recall the situation, when I tried to look them up and find a bond on that broker, they were non-existent. So it really comes down to the due diligence before you move the load. Know who the broker is you're working with.
I was going to say, it's better to be preemptive on this, and it's there's no foolproof way to determine whether it's going to be a double brokered load, but there's signs you can look for that you can avoid for a better experience. Just pulling the broker up on safer, if they've only been in business for a month, that's not a good sign. They a month in and they're already doing Amazon loads, kind of weird. Again, if you have an Amazon load to begin with, kind of weird. So there's no foolproof way, but there's some due diligence you can do. I'd rather take the call of, you got anything on this broker, than, hey, I just ran a load and now I'm screwed.
Yeah. It's definitely, as Chris said, catching it before, doing your homework, making sure they're valid, double checking them against the FMCSA's website as far as the phone numbers, looking them up on websites. Social media comes into this. There's all different ways that you can try to validate them. And, you really, they say trust your gut. If you got a gut feeling that it's bad, well, it's probably bad. So trust your gut,
You said social media comes into it. How?
Because through social media, through Facebook, and I'm not a big social media person, but I do know through there, you can look up some of the backgrounds, check them out, just Google them or go to your social media and see what you can find on them there. A lot of the times on some of these discussion groups, you find them talking about a specific broker, and hey, maybe it's a broker that you had considered working with, and you'll find out they either are or aren't legitimate even through that. There's just so much fraud going on out there. There's so many ways that a driver can, lose his shorts. Through double brokering, or which is technically double brokering, would be a carrier who secures a load and then rebrokers it out, who doesn't have brokerage authority. But you got this brokering fraud, which are these fraudulent brokers that appear to be legitimate, but they never plan on paying anybody. There's just so many different ways that a motor carrier can lose money. It's just due diligence. Check them out, know who you're working with, work with brokers that you have worked with before, that you already have a relationship with. It's just tough out there, Mark. And with so many scammers out there, there's just no surefire way, so you just got to do the best you can.
One of the things that's been talked about around here is going directly to load boards that are run by some of the major brokerages. Is that something that gives you at least some guarantee?
Yeah, and that goes back to our Amazon thing. If you haul Amazon loads for Amazon, why would you haul an Amazon load for a third party? If you haul C.H. Robbins or Schneider or J.B. Hunt, if you haul off their load boards, but if you see those loads and it's not a J.B. Hunt has a J.B. Hunt load, it's some third-party broker, for a fact that's being, at the very least, cut, if not double brokered, So if it's a load that for sure was an Allen Lund load, go to Allen Lund load board and get it. Don't take it from some other third party that is just taking a cut out of it.
Okay, well, guys, we're out of time for this topic, but I want to thank you very much for all the information.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
I've been talking with Tom Crowley and Kristopher Synder of OOIDA's Business Services. Landline Now will be back in a moment.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020. There
are a lot of ways to get crossways with the IRS, and none of them are good. Among those is a whole class of people who have simply not filed their taxes. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. Failing to file your taxes, whether for 1 year or several, can potentially be a disaster, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, it can be one of those rare instances where someone says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I discussed some of the issues involved with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. Well, Shasta, let's talk a little bit about the issue of unfiled back taxes. How does this happen? What are the typical situations that lead to someone not filing?
Well, it's more common than you would think, where maybe, the taxpayer is on the road, can't get back in time to meet that tax deadline. Maybe they've gone on extension and just missed that final extension deadline, is missing tax information, is trying to gather that back information. There's a whole slew of reasons why you possibly did not file on time.
What are some of the possible consequences if someone doesn't file a return?
Well, typically what we see is it kind of snowballs, where the next thing you know, it's already time to file the next year's tax return, and you are already behind from the previous year. So you feel like, well, I can't file this current year because I'm already behind on the last year. And the next thing you know, you may have multiple years unfiled. And and the stress just doesn't help at all. It just can get unmanageable and very stressful and harder to, reach out to get some help. And really, then you'll start getting notices from the IRS, and it can be very intimidating and hard to take that first step. But you really are risking, a garnishment of wages or a levy on a bank account, and it can get out of control very quickly.
You mentioned the IRS contacting the taxpayer. I'm curious, how does the IRS do that, and what are some of the ways that the IRS will not contact people? Because I know there are a lot of scams out there.
Yeah, the IRS typically will always be sending you notices through the mail. They're not going to be emailing you or typically calling you. Unless you already have some prearranged conversations that you've initiated going on. So don't, always check with your tax preparer if there's any doubt whatsoever, if contact from the IRS is legitimate. It'll be well worth your while making a phone call to your tax preparer saying, hey, I got this email or I got this message. What should I do? And let them advise you on how to move forward with that.
Now, what if someone does not hear from the IRS? I mean, at this point, does that mean they're in the clear? Do they still have a problem there?
No, they definitely have a problem. And a lot of times the IRS, what they'll do is they'll send you, let's say, for example, you have a 1099, you're self-employed, your gross income is over $100,000. Okay. The IRS hasn't gotten a tax return. So they decide, you know what, we're going to just assess the tax on the information we have, which is this 100,000 plus 1099, and send you a tax bill. Well, you and I know, if you're in trucking, your actual income is not what's shown on that 1099. It's a fraction of that because you have so many expenses. So here you'll get this huge tax bill, and that, just adds to the stress, when in reality, the situation isn't as dire as it seems. So getting those back taxes done, filing that tax return, is really going to help you know exactly what you owe. A lot of times a person knows they're going to owe, a tax preparer knows they're going to owe money, and they may not file because they don't have the money to pay. Well, that is a mistake. Always file the tax return. Know what the tax liability is, and then we can manage it from there, whether that's a monthly payment plan, whatever that looks like. And when you fail to file a return, not only are you being assessed, interest on whatever the tax liability is, you're being assessed a penalty for failure to file the return. So once you file, that stops at least part of that, that penalty that you're going to be assessed when you're filing a year, 2, 3 years late. Any money you can save yourself is going to, be in your best interest.
What if I lose some of the documents that I need for tax years I need to file on? Let's say I lose some 1099s or some of the other documents. What are my options at that point?
If you've lost any kind of income documents, you can go onto the IRS website and request a copy of all the documents filed, your transcripts. So they have a record of everything filed. So you can request that to get the accurate income information. Now, depending on what the information is you're missing in regards to expenses, you typically can get copies of settlements, bank statements, credit card statements. The thing we really can't replace if you lose would be, I would say, cash receipts. If you've paid cash for something and you lose that receipt, that's really all there is. You've lost it. You've lost that deduction, essentially.
Okay. Now, there are situations where people don't owe money.
Correct.
Or where they are going to get a return. Did they still need to file if they don't owe the IRS or if they're expecting a tax refund?
You should file because you want to have that on record that you don't owe. You definitely want to file if you're owed money, because after 3 years, they don't have to refund that money. So you'll miss out on that refund. So you definitely always want to file, because otherwise you're kind of left in the unknown. The IRS doesn't know the situation until you give them that tax return showing that, I had no income that year, I haven't filed. There aren't going to be penalties and interest if you don't owe, though, or have a refund coming.
Okay. There's a term that I ran into when I was looking at all this and kind of doing some research on my own. And I think you've kind of referred to this already, but it's called substitute for return. What exactly is that?
When the IRS prepares the return, you mean?
I believe so, but
the IRS, if they don't receive a tax return from you, and they have income information and don't have a tax return, say like the scenario with a 1099, they will essentially file the return for you.
As you mentioned earlier, and then of course you're looking at the potential that they're going to assess you on, all of your income, your gross income rather than your net.
Correct. Without any of your other deductions and credits and whatnot.
When you're doing this, we've got a lot of people now that file electronically, a lot of people that still file by paper. Does it matter how you send your return to the IRS if you're filing late?
No, it doesn't. We recommend always electronic filing if possible. Sometimes, depending on how old the tax return is, we may have to paper file, and then we just want to take all the precautions to make sure that is tracked and that there is documentation that it was received by the IRS, sending certified return receipt, taking those additional precautions. But electronic filing is always the fastest, easiest way to go.
Something else I was wondering about is what forms you use, because the forms change from year to year. That's something that I've noticed myself. And typically you just get the current year's tax forms. But if you're filing on previous years, do you still use the current year's tax forms? How do you go about that?
No, you really need to contact your tax preparer, because the returns have to be filed on the correct year's forms, because there's different things are required different years. Things may change. Like, for example, during COVID, there were things that were asked on that year that have never been asked before regarding your relief payments and so forth. So you absolutely have to use the correct tax year documents. So definitely if you're doing your return yourself, contact your tax preparer regarding back forms for back years.
Okay. How long can the IRS come after you if you haven't filed? I mean, I know there's limits on certain things. They can go back, so many years. Is there a limit on how far back they can go after you for not filing?
Yes, 10 years. And then with refunds, it's 3 years. You have to, file your tax return to receive a refund you have coming within 3 years of the tax due date, and then 10 years on a tax liability. And believe me, they're not going to let that go. They're going to come after you. They're definitely going to come after you. And once you file the return, it really is, it's actually, you're just giving them the information for that tax year. And once they have that, and once you know what that looks like, then you have other options open to you, whether that's an installment agreement, or if, let's say, this has gone on for multiple years and there is just a tax liability that you are never going to be able to pay back, and you are in a situation financially that just is not going to make that possible, then there's things open to you. For example, like doing an offer and compromise. That's a complex way to go, but it really has helped a lot of taxpayers when they have a tax liability that is just so astronomical that they're never going to be able to pay it back. And the IRS will recognize that if you submit all the proper and financial information, explain what the situation is. Maybe you've had some type of catastrophe, some huge medical situation. There's all kinds of scenarios out there that just make us unable to, pay these big tax liabilities. And the IRS will work with you. They want those back taxes. They want you back in the system. They want their money, whether it's a portion of it, all of it, they will work with you.
At what point does the IRS stop playing nice and get kind of serious on this stuff?
Well, the longer you wait, the bigger your risk of a wage garnishment, bank account levies, tax liens. These when they're starting to push. And each year you have to remember, each year your income documents are filed, whether that's W-2, 1099, and that shows, who you're working for. So they essentially are getting this updated every year, and they're pretty good at wage garnishment. And the people that you work for, they have no choice under the law. They have to garnish your wages. And same with your bank account, they will levy, they will take money out of your bank account if you owe back taxes and you have not made any arrangements with them. But if you set up a payment plan, or you are in the process of negotiating, say, an offer and compromise, that puts a halt to these bigger situations with the IRS where they're literally coming after you and you have absolutely no options. So talk to your tax preparer, get those back taxes filed, start a negotiation with getting that tax liability paid back so you can avoid these more extreme situations.
Okay. Well, Shasta, thank you very much for the information.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about unfiled back taxes. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website at mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. Again, that's at landlinenow.com. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. more miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
We've hit the home stretch of Landline Now today, and we'll finish up with a run through a few changes taking effect throughout the U.S., and that usually means Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine is joining us. And as I look over, there he is.
Hey.
Keith, how you doing?
How's it going? I didn't mean to surprise you.
Yeah, you just popped up out of nowhere. Where'd you come from? Keith, we appreciate having you. Let's start with a story out of New York City that we've been covering for a couple weeks now. We're talking changes going into effect for the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway involving automated weigh-in-motion enforcement systems. Let's start with a refresher here for those who may not be familiar with what they're doing there.
Yeah, looking to address, weight concerns, overweight vehicles being up on the BQE, as they refer to it locally. But yeah, something that at least the city, New York City DOT, is trying to, get a handle on. Just really having an effort to make it easier for them to enforce the weight, any type of weight violation. Folks who have used the BQE know very well what the setup is like. If folks who haven't used it, if they've seen pictures, get a pretty good understanding. It's a virtual, seemingly an impossibility to actually do any type of enforcement effort on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. So the solution in this particular case is having some weigh-in-motion system in place. Obviously, trying to do something to address concerns about overweight trucks, and this, at least at this point, is the best that they've been able to come up with.
And there is a grace period for 90 days that started on August 10th. We are talking pretty big fines here, though, $650 per violation. And OOIDA has been very vocal in opposition to this new law. Part of the reason is that fine, and I'll let you get into the details there. But the association has been, again, vocal in expressing some concerns about the way they're going about this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a new law. It is the only impact is to the New York City-owned portions of this expressway. Since it took effect, they have got the weigh-in-motion system up and running on the Queens-bound direction. There is a 90-day warning period. It took effect during the second full week of August. So, 90 days out from that, at that point, they'll be able to issue citations up to $650. So, quite notable. Later this year, the Staten Island-bound direction, they're supposed to get their weigh-in-motion systems up and running. And whenever that happens, they'll have their 90-day warning period. And then after that, they'll have, of course, the same fines as they've got already set up for the for the Queens-bound direction. But yeah, OOIDA been very vocal on this issue. I know Doug Morris, who's OOIDA's Director of State Government Affairs, among other responsibilities that he's got. But yeah, pointing out that they've, as other states before New York here, New York City specifically, other states have looked into using weigh-in-motion for violations, and they've found out that the weights measured have not fallen within scientific weight tolerances or even standards. So just one of the points that the association has made in opposition, concern, criticism of this new law.
Yeah, and again, $650. You could be 100 pounds overweight and get fined $650. You could be 5,000 pounds overweight and be fined $650. So, arbitrary, I guess, is one word for it. I'm sure there are more stronger language that we could use for that as well, but it's one question being raised.
Certainly, and as Doug Morris added that on their website, the Bureau, they publicly say that they're going to be enforcing these gross weight violations, but on their website it says that they will also enforce axle weight violations. So, there's also that little bit of confusion.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move over to Michigan now, where a state lawmaker is hoping to do away with a tolling program that's been in effect for more than 60 years. Keith, which bridge are we talking about?
Well, is there another bridge in Michigan, the Mackinac Bridge? I mean, I know there are.
I'm sure there's probably a few.
Man, if you're talking about a bridge in Michigan, I think that's where everybody's mind goes to.
Sure.
And, going back to the late 1950s when the bridge opened up, they've been collecting tolls and. Passenger vehicles are paying $4 across. Larger vehicles, they pay $5 an axle. It generates to the tune of more than $20 million annual revenue there from that bridge. And there's an effort that's been introduced this summer there at the State House. There's a House bill that would stop collecting tolls on the Mackinac Bridge. And it's something that you really didn't see coming. To listen to the bill sponsor talk about it, it makes sense. He's wanting to have instead of collecting tolls, just have it be part of the state's highway system, and it gets funded like any other type of road or bridge in the state. But those who are supporters of the tolls, including the Mackinac Bridge Authority chairman himself, says that it would be essentially a disaster if they were to get rid of tolls. So, interesting that this has come up. The viability that it would get through the State House, I don't see it happening. But it is an interesting conversation to start having there in Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, that is the question, right? We're talking, $23 million in annual revenue from tolling on the Mackinac Bridge. The question would be, where does that money come from instead if you're not doing it through tolls? And I'm not sure anybody has the answer. I'm not sure that state rep does even.
Yeah, well, the bill as it was introduced, it doesn't specify exactly where the revenue would come from other than just simply putting it under the umbrella of what the state highway system currently gets its money from.
Yeah. Won't hold my breath on this one, but we'll keep an eye on it for sure. Let's end with an interesting story here. Finally, there's one state in the nation where people cannot pump their own gasoline because one state just removed itself from that list. Yeah,
I know this is it's interesting. At least I thought it was. Really doesn't have any impact on truckers. Not directly, but for truck drivers who have traveled in and through Oregon or New Jersey, very probably aware of the fact that it has been illegal in Oregon, as it continues to be in New Jersey for self-service gas, and that's been the deal for going back to the early 50s in Oregon, late 40s in New Jersey. Now there has been exceptions in these rules for truck drivers. It does not apply to diesel fuel, but if you're a motorist in those particular two states, they have not trusted motorists to be able to, figure out safely how to pump gas, which I know for the rest of the country, it's a head scratcher. But in Oregon, they decided to go ahead and abandon that rule. Now, there are some provisions in it. They're not completely doing away with full service in Oregon. It's just that certain counties, the most populated counties there in Oregon, the top 16, they have to, if they are going to provide self-service, they have to make about at least 50% of their pumps self-service. Mm-hmm. And those stations that continue to have at least a portion of their pumps being full service, they have to have at least one employee on staff. Interesting. It's an anomaly at this point, but in the United States, but interesting that Oregon is doing away with it.
Real quick, when's the last time you went to a full service station, Keith?
I think I was a passenger and not
It's
an
been
actual
a while,
driver.
right?
Yes, it was
Yeah.
probably the early 80s.
Yeah, it's been about 30 years for me as well. Keith, always a pleasure. We'll see you next time.
All right, thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Keith Coble of Landline Magazine, and our thanks to you for listening. That's our show for today. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.